Welcome to another edition of the Mylance podcast, Six Figure Secrets for Fractional Experts. I'm here today with Lisa Glenn Nobles out of King George, Virginia. Lisa, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So I'm so excited to chat with you in part because of what consulting enabling you to do now. So let's jump right in. Tell us a little bit about your business and then what you're doing in addition to that.
Absolutely. So, my business is LGN Collaborations. We are a full service operations consulting firm, which essentially means we're going to help your business to clarify exactly what you do, how you do it, why you do it that way, and then help you find greater efficiencies as you move forward. And so, I have a team that helps me to be able to provide that service to clients. And to speak to, how consulting has helped me to support my community and what I'm able to do in my community, I have sort of a circuitous journey in that I think probably like most people who are listening to this and most people who have gone into consulting, like that wasn't my plan. And so I first started, just thinking like, I need a break from corporate and startup. I need a way to pay my bills, and I have some clients that I've worked with on and off basis, and I'll just do that and see where things land. And I'll keep applying for jobs. And I definitely never thought like I will start a business, I will be a consulting firm. That was never in my brain. Um, and so as I went forward, I started to realize like, I really enjoyed it because it's varied work and I really appreciate that. Something in my ADHD brain appreciates that portfolio company approach. And so I, had really begun to enjoy that work and began bringing on virtual assistants and other supports as most consultants do, right? Somebody to help me make sure that the invoices are paid, somebody to help me design a document, because since operations is my superpower, design is not. And so I was working in the way that most consultants do and outsourcing pieces as I needed to. About a year into my consulting journey, my partner got a new job and we had the opportunity to move across the country, which had not been in the plan in any way, but it was a great opportunity for him. And so we decided to take that leap, and it enabled us to buy a house and all kinds of wonderful things. So we were very excited about it. And we landed here in beautiful King George, Virginia, which, as you said it, I thought people are Googling that right now. So King George is about an hour and a half outside of the DC metro area. And the reason that we landed here is government consulting, but it has a lot of folks for various purposes, most of them government related. So there are lots of government employees as well as particularly defense employees in this area. And as I landed here, I looked around and I saw that the demographics looked a little bit different than I was used to in Seattle and Phoenix. And that had a particular look to it that I was really surprised at in 2024. So King George is home to one of the largest research and development naval bases in the country. I had no idea about that, and most people would not have a reason to. But they employ 17,000 people, and the entire county of King George is only 33,000 people. So you can do the math there. If you walk out into my neighborhood and throw a rock, you're hitting somebody who works the base. And most of the time, in a very heteronormative example, that's dad that works at the base and is an engineer typically, and mom is staying home with the kids. Now, that's not a choice every time, because since the naval base is the largest employer in the county, the next largest is Walmart. So it's a tough situation to be in, because if you are one of those typically very educated people married to an engineer, you probably have done something professionally and you probably would like to do it again. But we only have 2 certified childcare facilities in the county, and most of the great jobs are a 2-county drive at least. And so we find lots of women who are making the very smart financial decision to stay home because it would cost them more to get a job than it would to pay for childcare. And so as I was noticing that and I was thinking about the work that I was doing, I thought, I already work with all moms. Every single 1099 support that I have is a mom. And that's interesting. I'm going to ask them why that is the case. I'm going to try to understand this a little bit more. And so I began to really look at that, and it became very clear like, this is a great flexible opportunity for women who have those professional skills and who are able to really get into the workforce, but do it on their own terms, perhaps while they're in between dropping kids off at the bus or during nap time. And so I started to really embrace that model. And it has been phenomenal on a number of levels, but most importantly, that in King George, where there are not an abundance of incredible jobs for folks that are very flexible, it gives me the opportunity to employ people who might not otherwise have that great opportunity. And that's been something that, again, I definitely never set out to do. I never thought to myself, like, I'd like to bridge the rural and digital divide in the US for moms returning to work. But here we are. And it's been a really exciting opportunity.
It's so cool how you not only are making this work for you, but then helping other women in this. It's like consulting can be so powerful, and you're kind of exponentially doing it because now you're extending it to others. How are you finding these moms? You said most of them are like, where do they come from?
Yeah, so this is a really advanced technological answer, which is sometimes I post on Facebook in moms groups, um, in my neighborhood group, and you'd be amazed at who comes out of the woodwork, right? So my first approach was just to post on my neighborhood Facebook group and say like, hey, I'm doing this thing. It's a great opportunity for moms who are either, underemployed or unemployed and want to be in the workforce. If you would be interested in going on a quick walk around the neighborhood with me so I can sort of share with you what I do and you can share what your superpowers are, that'd be cool. And it's been great on a number of levels because people will say, oh my gosh, I'd love to do that. I'd love to have some more flexibility. But they also say, oh, my neighbor would be great, but she's not on Facebook. Let me give you her number. Or my daughter-in-law is really looking for something like this. And so it's been an easy way to find amazing, talented women and to develop some community in a place that, I'm brand new to. I'm sure there will come a time where I can't do it that easily, but so far it literally has been that simple.
Like, how big is the we? I heard you say we, and I know there's this team of 1099 supporting you. How big is it?
Yeah, so right now I have 10 folks who are supporting anywhere from 10 to 30 hours a week. Really depends on the person and what their season is. So, I've got a couple of folks who have 1-year olds. They're really looking at like the 10 to 20 hours and mostly the 10 hours. And then I have several people who, have kids in school who are happy to be working 8 to 3 while kids are, on the bus or at school.
Very, very cool. And so it wasn't always like this, right? At one point, it was just you.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about the journey, because I think that's where is some of the hardest part for people is just how do I kind of bridge the gap between my W-2 previously, where I was making a certain amount of money, and now I heard you say earlier in a previous conversation you wanted to replace that. So how did you go from quitting my job to I'm replacing my W-2 income?
Sure. So I started out knowing that I, like to do various things and enjoy, volunteering and being on boards and that kind of thing, sort of taking on clients here and there on the side. So I have a background in ed tech. And so I had helped an ed tech company in Ghana on a volunteer basis. I had worked with a nonprofit in Seattle to help them create some training documentation as well as curriculum for students. So, I had a number of those gigs here and there and just sort of kept those running as I could, nights and weekends, but nothing that was making significant money. Like it was a great opportunity. It was fun money, but it wasn't anything significant. And I really did not, like I said, I didn't really plan, which I don't recommend generally, right? Like I'm an operations person. I love planning. But I got to a point in my job where I felt like, this doesn't feel tenable anymore. I feel frustrated. I feel like I want to do something different. And I knew I had a client that was willing to work with me and that really needed the work done and that I could sort of pitch to. And so I called that person up and said, here's what I'd suggest. And I could be on retainer for. And the number I used was what I needed to make sure that my bills were paid, plus about 40%, because I thought, I'm going to need to pay my taxes. The government's not going to stop asking for that. I'm going to need some additional money for, the various online softwares that I'm going to need, that kind of thing. And so I pitched literally the amount I needed to cover my bills plus 40%, and that worked. And so I said, okay, I can do this. And so then I spent the next year knowing that that would be pretty steady for me for at least 6 months, building up a client roster in the background, right? So that paid for my bills. I knew if nothing else, like I had that in the bag. And then I started, going to networking events and posting on LinkedIn and making, sending emails and checking in with my network and sharing what I'm doing, knowing that the clients that I would sign initially might be smaller because I didn't have a lot of consulting experience to show, and that one sort of marquee client would be an anchor for the first little bit and allow me to have the financial security to do that. And because I know anybody listening to this who's probably listened to your podcast for a while or who's followed you on LinkedIn is going to say, like, no, we do not typically want one giant client. That is not a good long-term strategy. But it does help in the short term at the very beginning, as long as you're sort of hustling in the background and trying to get those extra clients coming.
So you rattled off a few strategies as you were mentioning, building up that pipeline. What was the most, I'd say, lucrative or effective for you? And would you recommend that as like a suggestion to someone else, or would you say not so much?
Yeah, so that's a great question that there's a two-pronged answer to. There's the short-term answer and there's the long-term answer. So the short-term answer is I am really good in person. I am a great in-person networker. I always joke that like my parents spent a lot of money on theater classes and voice lessons, and they thought that I might, end up on Broadway. And it turns out it's for facilitation and networking, um, which has also been phenomenal. So I am great in person. So I decided to join my local chamber of commerce and go to meetings there. I was and am in a smaller area, and so that was very helpful. In a large metro area, you probably want to choose something a little bit more targeted than the chamber. But I joined the Chamber of Commerce. I joined a leads group that essentially has one person of every position or demographic in that group, and then you refer to each other. And that was very effective and one of the ways that I found initial clients. And then I talked people's ears off and I just shared what I was doing, right? And so I got really lucky. Like my husband was going in to get a suit made because he is a lifter and needed something that would fit him. And his tailor just happened to be somebody who was like, oh my gosh, you're exactly what I need. I had no idea that I needed this or that it existed. So just sharing with people generally. So that's the short-term version. The reason it's short-term is that like that runs out. There are only so many businesses in your area, especially if you're in a smaller area. And you can only work with so many of them because you're only a fit. So then I really started in on LinkedIn and using my greater sort of digital network to begin to share what I was doing and do some colder outreach.
Very cool. One thing that you mentioned is sharing your experience, right? Asking questions and just, you said, talking people's ears off. And I hear from so many people and a lot of women as well of it's hard to kind of pitch myself, right? There's
Yeah.
imposter thoughts and there's fears of failure and rejection, and it's across the board. But I definitely it feels really loud from a lot of women that I
Yes.
speak with. So how did you get over that? And I guess did it exist for you? Because it's not for everybody. But
Yeah.
how did you think about overcoming that and just being
Oh,
unapologetically like, I'm going to talk people's ears off?
I am still getting over it.
Mm.
I will share the anecdote that, and to my amazing connection and supporter, JW, I'm telling a story on you, and he's amazing and was so sweet. But he is one of the folks that I'd worked with years ago, and we were going back and forth on LinkedIn to set up a meeting. And we are both unapologetically sarcastic when we know the other person is very sarcastic. And so he basically said, like, how can I help prepare for this meeting? And what are you looking for? And I basically said, well, I started my own thing, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, so help me get business for free. And he was being totally sarcastic, but that imposter moment set in, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, and I started the apologizing thing, right? And he was like, no, 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 I'm just teasing you. Like, you've really gone soft in your old age. And I was like, the business ownership thing is hard. Like, I I really doubt myself in a very different way. So you're absolutely right. Like, it has been there, it is still there. I think as I have had more quote unquote results to show, it's been easier. So as I could quantify what I'm offering, that's been very helpful. And so some of what I spend my time on is like, what did I do this week, this month, this quarter that is quantifiable value for the customer so that I'm able to share that moving forward? The other really big thing is just practice, right? Like, you're going to share it and some people's eyes are going to glaze over and they're not going to get it, or they're going to say, I mean, I get this all the time, like, oh, so you're an admin assistant. Like, no, I am definitely not an admin assistant. If that's what you got out of this, then like we are not the right match, and that's okay. It took a lot of repetition. It has taken a really amazingly supportive partner who like routinely steps in and hears the imposter thoughts and says like, "Are you kidding? Like, that's not real. That's not who you are. You're awesome. Like, you always figure this out. You might not see that right now." So vulnerability with people close to me, I think. I like to compare most things to like being in the gym. If you do the reps, the growth comes. It's never fun. It's always uncomfortable. And some things are way more uncomfortable than the others. And you just practice and iterate and try. So yeah, I think that's really common. And I think particularly for women, important to call out that it's happening, because at least for me, what I see on LinkedIn is like the polished version of everybody who knows exactly how to do what they're doing and they're experts. And what goes off in the back of my head is, oh God, am I not an expert? Wait, I should know how to do, or I shouldn't have this feeling. And the more I talk to people, the more I realize like, no, everyone has this feeling and we're all just figuring it out as we go.
What would you say to someone who says, it doesn't feel good for me to self promote on LinkedIn?
I think my answer would be it doesn't always feel good for me either, but also it's not really self-promotion when you're a small business, right? Like, I have to shift my thinking from this is about what I'm so awesome at and I'm Lisa and you should think Lisa's cool, to this is about my business. I am truly bringing value to the people that I work with. And I know that because they've told me that. And I want to get to do that with other businesses. And this is how I get to that. And I also think like there is ample room for a vulnerability post here and there that isn't like a weird attention seeking thing, but is, hey, this is scary for me too. Like, it's okay. We're humans. And I really appreciate that. Like last week, even, I saw Chris Ronzio, who owns Trainual, great platform, especially for ops people. By all intents and purposes, like Chris has made it. Like they have done very well. And he is one of the smartest people like I go to for modeling. I definitely think a lot of the way he thinks about business. And he posted something to the effect of like, I have basically gotten up every day for 30,000 days and just like thrown spaghetti against the wall and seen what happens. Which is just the truth, right? So like it's okay to share what value you bring that's not self-promotional. And if you need to sprinkle it with a decent amount of, I'm not perfect, that's okay too.
There's so much gold in what you're saying. So hopefully it's really like resonating with a lot of folks. And I know it's can be common knowledge to you at this point, but it's really interesting to someone who's on this journey trying to figure out how do I get the word out there about the value that I can add to companies.
Yeah, I definitely think it is a journey. You're going to get better at it as you go. Sort of like anything, like I try to keep some data on what works and what doesn't work. And when I say some, I really mean some. Like you do not have to start out with a full report on, everything you do, but like I use a scheduling tool called Smarter Queue to post everything. And I really like it because I can post on a lot of different platforms and it gives me a schedule. So the behind the curtain reality is like it looks like I'm posting on LinkedIn all the time, but it's not actually me. One of the wonderful things that it does is it gives me a report of like how many likes and comments. Was it better when I had a picture? Was it better when I shared a longer story or a shorter story? So I have used that as just a quick, like, is this working and what topics do people care about? And then I try to just, the next week do a little more of that and a little less of the other and really optimize for that. And that has helped. And if you don't have something like that, like just take once a month or once a week and go back to your list of posts and see what did well. But that's been a really important piece for me to just reflect on like what's working and why should I do more of what I'm doing.
What do you actually post on LinkedIn these days?
Yeah. So what I tend to post is a combination of a few categories of things. And this was shared with me by a dear friend, Jess Eastman Stewart, who is also a fantastic LinkedIn model. So if you need to learn from somebody who's done a great job, Jessica Eastman Stewart, she runs Joyfully Managed Family. And she basically said, what I would recommend is like tips and tricks based on whatever it is you do, inspiration of some sort. I will be the first to say I am not good at that. I am not whatever the personality test is where you get the blues, the people who like really love the like warm fuzzy. I'm not that person. And so that's been tough for me, but I committed to doing it. About me, because people care who you are as a human. And then basically what we offer. So here is a service that I offer. You can click on this link to sign up, purchase, get more information, etc. And so I try to post in those topics. I will be the first to say the services we offer is the one that I probably post in the least because it does feel weird still. And I'm working really hard on making that not feel weird. But I tend to post content in those categories. And I think probably the most in tips and tricks because the whole point is like, let me help you. If you don't have the time, energy, money, alignment, whatever for my services, that's fine. But I found this really cool way you can color code your Google folders, and I think you should know. So I like to share those things.
Yeah. And all of those categories, except for the services, they're what I call give posts, right? Mm-hmm. You're giving value. And then you have your every once in a while, your ask post.
Yep.
Right. And so, and then if you're always asking, you're not going to do well on LinkedIn. Right. No. So if you're mostly giving and then every once in a while you have the ask, then it's kind of timely. It's like, oh, maybe I do want to work with her. Right.
And I think that that's a good ratio to think about just generally in connecting with people. Like, nobody wants to get asked for something every time they see you.
Right.
And so, it's great for me to go to networking events where they say like, share a little bit about your business and a pitch of anything you're offering. But I know that like 9 times out of 10, nobody's going to say yes to that because it's not the right timing, and that's okay. People need to see what you're doing often 8 to 12 times before they even think like, I should go look at her website or like, oh, that's interesting. Like I should follow her. So you're just building that goodwill. And I think that's really critical.
You have a strong marketing acumen for especially for an operations person. Most people don't. It's not a normal thing to even know that you need all those touch points for someone. Where did you learn how to do this?
In a totally roundabout way. So I was in the nonprofit world for a while, and then I was in the startup world. And in both areas, you wear about 65 hats at all times. And so in some of those cases, like I was actually the one responsible for marketing posts, even though I wasn't a marketing person. In fundraising, you always talk about touches, how many touches a donor needs before they're going to give. And so that was just kind of baked into my learning and development. But I also will say, like, I love podcasts. I listen to them constantly if I'm on a run, if I'm in the car. Now that I'm 30 minutes outside a town and that's where I have to go to get my groceries, like I do a lot of podcast listening. And so I try to find a varied list of topics. Like I could listen to operations content all day long. There's not much of it. So if you're an ops person, like make a podcast. But I try to find varied topics, and marketing is one that I know I need. So I try to seek that out.
Very cool. From one operations person to another and talking to dozens of them over the years, honing your niche as an operations person or communicating your value is one of the hardest things, because when you say I work in operations, nobody has any idea what that means.
Yep.
How did you deal with this? How do you pitch yourself now as far as your value add to a client?
Sure. So I will be very frank that that is still incredibly hard. That being said, I tend to share that I help mission oriented businesses or organizations, because I do work with both businesses and nonprofits. I help mission oriented organizations get clear on what they do, how they do it, and why they do it that way. And I tend to focus more on process documentation and process mapping because that's just what I love. I do have clients that don't include that, right? Like I do have projects that don't include that. And like I said, I think it's the ADHD brain. Like I really love having the variety. But when you are communicating to a cold outreach, like they need to be really clear about what problem you're solving. Because if they're not, they're just like, yeah, okay, like I can get a consultant every 5 minutes. So I do tend to focus on process mapping and process documentation. Like, is your process so convoluted that you could not explain it to anyone? I understand that's not going to help you scale. Let's get it clarified, written down, and documented as much as possible so that you can scale. And that tends to be a pretty clear call to action.
How did you get from probably not having a niche at all to that kind of clarity where you can communicate that to a customer now?
A combination of things. So I think part of it was like doing a variety of projects and figuring out like which ones do I like better, because I can do all of this. I am an ops generalist. I've always worked in smaller organizations, startups, et cetera. And so that forces you into that generalist bucket. You don't get to focus in on something really tight like you probably did at Uber, right? And so that is just harder to get your head around initially. So I really focused on like, what do I enjoy doing? And then what is the most replicable that I can create a process around? And I mean, not ironic at all for a process person to tell you like, create a process, but what can I create a process around so that the next time I go to a client, it's not a black box. It's, hey, this is how I do this. And then I can bring in team members and say, hey, this is how we do this. Remember, we always start here and we always use this general process. And yeah, things are going to be really different as we go from time to time. But we do this over and over again, so it feels comfortable. So that was really, I mean, it was really trial and error, and also seeing what the biggest challenges were. And I will tell you, like, I have yet to walk into a business that has their process documentation on lock. Like, I've not seen one yet. I would love to. If you have that, like, call me because I want to see it. I don't know a single one. They're all kind of a mess from, small to large, from, single entity, like it's just wild. So that's a piece where I thought, I can play in this niche and have work to do for days and hours and weeks and months. And wouldn't that be fun? And there are a lot of different tools to use too. And I love it. Like I love getting to do it sometimes in Google Docs and sometimes in Trainual and sometimes in, another platform that the client really loves. And you learn something different from each of those experiences. So yeah, that's the long-winded answer to how did I figure that out? Sounds like I still am figuring it out.
Yeah, and I do. That's what I tell people is it's a journey of figuring it out and honing it in and probably iterating and changing. And you don't need it perfectly nailed. In fact, you're not going to have it perfectly nailed when you put yourself out there, which means that's going to feel a little uncertain and ambiguous and maybe weird, and that's okay. And you'll figure it out, right? And that's part of the journey.
Absolutely. Like I remind myself routinely of the metaphor of a swan, right? Like it looks really, really graceful above the surface and it's, paddling like crazy below the surface. It's okay that you don't know. It's normal that you don't know. You'll get there. You'll make some missteps. Like I've taken on clients where I realized later on, like, oh, this is not a fit. And it's because I wasn't clear enough or I wasn't honest enough with myself or the client really didn't understand what I do and what I'm best at. That's going to happen. So I think it's really understandable and normal to not have it all figured out.
We've had a number of guests talk about integrity as they navigate their business. And what I mean in reference to is if you're talking to a potential client and that they're not a fit, telling them upfront, right? And then it kind of it pays back later on. But do you have experience in kind of turning down clients or referring them elsewhere? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's critical to tell people if they're not a fit, right? I don't think this is, I like to use the term alignment, which maybe sounds a little woo-woo, but like for me, if things are not in alignment, it's like driving your car when it's not aligned. I was driving down the highway a couple of weeks ago and saw a car that was literally at a 10-degree angle from the front to the back because it was not in alignment. We know what's going to happen to that car. And everybody on the freeway, I think, had the same reaction all at once, which was like, oh God, oh God, oh God, like, please stay far in front of me. So I think people understand that you want to be in alignment. That's language that's helpful. But I also think like if you don't choose to make that determination and you say to yourself like, well, it's another retainer client and that would be really nice because I want to have a fixed income or, whatever the case may be, you do pay for it later. Like I have had a couple of clients now that like my partner would tell you, like, I really wish you'd never taken that one on because you spend a lot of time outside of work worrying about it. Yeah. Like I always know like the best clients are the ones where my partner says, wait, who is that again? And the worst ones are the ones where my partner says, oh yeah, that one. And you want to avoid that because you really do want to be providing value and you want to be receiving value, right? Like you want to put in energy where good energy comes back. And it's really hard to do that if you if you say yes to everything.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk more on the sales and marketing side for a second. You're a business owner, and especially now that you have these women underneath you, how do you think about budget? And I'm saying budget in terms of both money and energy, just like time towards sales and marketing and finding new clients for, I'm going to say, your consulting business.
Yeah. And that's a tough one, right? Especially as a smaller entity. Like I know for larger entities, your marketing budget should be 10 to 20% of your overall budget. Like it's a huge amount.
Yeah.
If I were spending that much right now, that would probably not be great. And so I am towing my way towards that, right? Knowing that that's the standard. In terms of time, I try to take 1 to 2 hours a week. 2 hours is like an amazing week, right? Where I can work on content creation, whether that's me creating it or having another person on the team create it, but getting ideas out of my head because I have to be the visionary and the voice of where we're going and getting it down on paper, so to speak. It's all digital, but yes. And then doing that cold outreach. Like I'm telling you, Bradley, when I use your product and I am working dang hard to make it part of my like ongoing process, like I force myself to do it because it isn't the thing that comes naturally to me. But I know that if I don't spend time on it every week, it won't come back, like it won't multiply. And it's not something you can do all at once. And it's not something you can do in a rush, right? And so I've definitely seen times where I didn't do that. And then because I didn't have the discipline for it when a client rolled off or a project ended, I had a gap. And I am pretty financially conservative. And so I usually have funds to make that work. But I mean, it doesn't stress me out any less. And then I found times where like I hit the accelerator really hard. And then so many things came in at once that it was like, whoa, I can't, like, there's no way I could keep up. This is not a good idea. So that discipline of doing it, a couple of hours a week and making sure that I'm really spending that time, key. I think batching it is key because I can make myself do it all at once and then it's done and it's automated. And then, I like to look at it like brushing my teeth. That might not be everybody's example, but like I'm a good teeth brusher. I do it every day. I floss every day. I'm that person that goes to the dentist and can confidently say like, yes, I have done all these things. And I do that because I want to keep my teeth. Like I like them. I want to keep my business. I want to be able to do this on my own for as long as that's my choice. And so it's a discipline that's required for the maintenance of the business, just like, I have to brush my teeth to make sure that my body is healthy.
I think it's a great analogy, right? It's like you don't necessarily love to do it, but it's required if you want to keep your teeth or keep running this business, right? It's just part of the deal.
Just like my toothbrush, like I got an electric toothbrush so that it will make me do it for 2 minutes because I don't want to sit there and do it for 2 minutes. Like that's really boring. I don't want to go work out a couple of times a week. A lot of the time, I would rather, watch a video or go out to the garden or do anything else, but it is required. And so, I have to sort of give it that discipline. And it has required, like, I put it on my calendar. I don't take meetings during that time. I have to make that a red line for myself because I will schedule over it otherwise. And that doesn't help me.
The activities you mentioned, just quickly, you said content creation. I heard cold outreach. Anything else that fits into that BD bucket for you?
Yeah, any kind of networking activities. So I do still try to do a decent amount of in-person work. This is probably a controversial take, but like community work, if I'm going to volunteer for something, that is still BD for me because I'm often working with a nonprofit and, that could be an opportunity. I think also going into that is just maintaining your network generally. So I like to go on and post on LinkedIn on comments that, people have made or scroll through and say, oh, I haven't heard from so-and-so in a while. Like, I wonder what they're doing. Or text my old boss and say, hey, how's everything going? Like, those are all important pieces that round things out generally.
And I really hope everyone listening to this is like taking this home because this is what it takes, right? Just keeping up with your network and doing the cold outreach. And it's not one thing. There's no silver bullet. Like you listed five things that you're doing. And my guess is they all hit to varying degrees at different times in different ways. And it's relatively unpredictable. But if you're doing all of these things relatively consistently in your 2 hours a week, then it works.
Absolutely. And I think I should add to that, I have a newsletter. So putting content in for the person who writes my newsletter to actually, go through and add to that. Yeah, it is not just one thing, it's over and over again. And that's what makes it a little bit stressful, but it's also what makes it interesting and worthwhile. And I will say, like, I have had people reach out to me that I haven't heard from in 20 years. I had an old college friend the other day who reached out and said, like, I was so thrilled to see your post about this. Like, please keep this stuff coming. I really enjoy it. And it's great to know what you're doing. She and I don't cross paths. We live in different cities. We're in different sectors. Like, but it's just something that people genuinely do appreciate.
I love that. As we wrap up, how do you want your business to grow? It sounds like you have 10 women slash moms in your team now. In 2, 3, 5 years, pick your timeline. Where do you want this to be?
Yeah. So it's such a funny question because I just never saw myself here. I actually I had a networking call with an old boss of mine, and he said, "Gosh, I'm so like happy to see you coming into your own and like being the person that I looked at when you were 25 and thought like there's so much potential here, but you just didn't know where you were yet." And it's great to see that and feel that. It's also still really weird at the same time. But what I envision, like I said, I moved to rural America without really like planning for that. But I have a strong background in the Southeast and in working with rural communities. And it just was so clear to me immediately, like, we are failing rural Americans in so many ways, in healthcare, in food systems, in jobs. I mean, you guys will probably edit this out, but Bradley and I had a bad internet connection briefly, and that is because most parts of my county still don't have broadband access, which is wild in 2024. How they did school during the pandemic, I have no idea. But we are failing rural Americans. I believe that really strongly. And I feel really passionate about bringing opportunities to these communities because there are smart, amazing, wonderful people who want a different kind of lifestyle. And that is totally appropriate. That's what I want. I want to be able to walk out in my garden and only hear the rooster that's on the farm next door. Like, that is a wonderful thing. And so I really have started to think through, what does it look like to create a certification program for women who want to do this kind of work, so that if you've never done it before, if you're transitioning careers, which is often the case for a mom, let's say you were a teacher or a nurse, just to give a couple of examples of the folks I've talked to recently. How do I show that I'm good at this thing that is marketable online? And how do I look for work? How do I, what are the sites where I find opportunities? How do I communicate what I'm great at? So providing a certification process for women to go through that. And then, I mean, the benefit of that is like, I get to see the cream of the crop, amazing women, and I get to choose them first, and also helping them to find work. So, in addition to having the consultancy, I can really see this looking like, sort of a placement opportunity or a staffing opportunity for women who are living in rural communities. And I see that in partnership with county governments, particularly. There's a big push right now to upskill folks. And a lot of times that looks like resume building, which, I mean, most of us can go to Chat GPT now and like take our current resume and be like, how do you improve this? Like, make it better. So instead of that kind of approach, getting counties to invest in, how do I actually help the folks who already have great training to match what the marketplace needs, and then allow those people who need a flexible work from home schedule to do that, because we all know in 2024 that we can do that. There's no reason not to.
Yeah. Wow. I love it. How can women, moms, people find you?
You can find me at LGN Collaborations. So on LinkedIn, you can find me. It's just my name, Lisa Glenn Nobles, or the company LGN Collaborations. I will say I do not have a company social media right now. I am working on it, but it has not been the highest priority, so it hasn't happened yet. You're also always welcome to email me, Lisa at lgncollab.com.
Awesome. Well, is there anything you want to leave our listeners with as we wrap up?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, let's see, key points for me are always if you do it more than once, document it. And that can be a video, that can be writing it down, it doesn't matter. But if you do it more than once, document it. And then the second is if you want something done well, fast and efficiently, you call a mom. So we would love to work with you. And I have a team of, folks who do amazing work quickly and efficiently because they have to in their home lives all the time.
Always be selling. I love it. You're honestly incredibly inspiring, and it's been a privilege to have you on the podcast and share your story. So thank you so much for the time and sharing your wisdom with the community.
Thank you for having me. It's so appreciated. And thanks for all that you've done with MyLance. It really has been an inspiration to what I've been able to do. And a reminder that even if I don't know anyone, quote, like me in my community, you people exist. I find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again, Lisa, and we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much.